All right, so I think everyone knows that there are 50 U.S. states, but there's also some territories and the District of Columbia. They're not U.S. states, but they do pay taxes. They don't vote. Well, they kind of vote. It's weird. And so today, Drew and I are just going to talk about now that Democrats are in control of the Senate, the House, and the presidency. Will they try to push forward in bringing on the enfranchisement of more voters in these U.S. territories? So, Drew, before we get started, I first off hope you're well. I know you're down in Southern California, so if you know Congressman Eric Swalwell, I would love it if you would tell him to stop sending me emails because they're trying to get me to send money, and I do not like him. But anyways, I thought I would start off with that.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I'll just DM him real quick and let him know. Yeah.
yeah, they're asking for money and all this stuff. I'm like, come on, man, you were sleeping with a Chinese spy. But anyways, so why don't we start with D.C. if that's okay? I just wanted to give a quick little background on kind of why D.C. isn't a state, and if this is the first time you're hearing that, listeners, yeah, D.C. is not a state. And so basically, the oldest origin story of D.C. is that the British kicked out a very unfortunate Native American tribe, and then over time, basically what happened was it became parts of Maryland and Virginia. And then finally, after the Constitutional Convention and the ratification of the Constitution in, I believe it was like 1790, land was taken out of Virginia and Maryland to create the District of Columbia, which is now D.C. At the time, there were like 3,000 people, so it wasn't anything too insane. But slowly over time, the population was not allowed to vote for Congress or the president. Now, the Congress did give them like their own kind of elections. You know, they could elect city officials, elect mayors, that type of jazz. So it wasn't like they couldn't make any decisions, but they were never allowed to vote for a senator, a congressman, or the president, which is kind of interesting. And so then in the 1870s, Congress actually stripped D.C. of any representation, mainly because, guess what? That area was full of mainly ex-slaves. And a lot of white landowners did not want D.C. to have this much political power, especially in the capital of the nation. And something wild that I saw is that during Reconstruction, 2/3 of D.C. was black. So it's kind of fascinating to me. And it does, I think, tell us right off the bat that there were some racial reasons for them not wanting to make D.C. a state. And now there were also constitutional reasons, you know, where it's not in the Constitution. The idea by the founders was, or at least some of the founders, was that this is the house of government. This is the city of government. It's not a state because that's where people are going to work. Now, obviously, things have changed. But anyways, last thing I'll say is that during the civil rights era, things did start to change because a lot of black voters in surrounding areas realized that civil rights also involved giving people in D.C. the right to vote. And so there was the 23rd Amendment, which did give people in D.C. the right to vote for president and vice president. And then D.C. residents won the right to elect their own mayor and city council. But there's kind of a growing call for statehood. So Drew, should D.C. be a state? Just initial thoughts.
I think they deserve it. I mean, if you're an American citizen, you don't have a congressman or woman, that seems odd, right? I think that, I mean, gosh, the reason we have this country is the whole idea of taxation without representation. I mean, that's literally what's going on in D.C. Now, the representation's got a little bit better, but it's not on the same. I mean, if you live in D.C., you have less political representation than the guy who lives across the river in Virginia. That's just a fact. That shouldn't be it. And I understand that the original idea of maybe you create a neutral zone where you have the heads of state and the government to meet, and you have this neutral zone where we hash out, government stuff. But the reality is the Washington, D.C. is now a fully fledged city that includes a ton of industries and people and flow of goods and services and commerce. It is not only, it's obviously most known for its being the seat of American government and probably holding some of the most power in the world. But it's also a city where people, have a hot dog stand and take their kids to baseball games and, pay property taxes for their schools, like anyone else in America. And so for those people to have less political representation is simply just not okay, in my opinion. But I think the problem is, as you mentioned it before, is there's political implications for having people vote in D.C. And one of the main things I think today that prevents it from being a possibility is the fact that D.C. would be pretty overwhelmingly Democratic. Capital D, blue party Democratic. And for the statehood to get through the Senate without a filibuster, you would need 60 votes. and no, for the state to get to the Senate with a filibuster, yeah, you need 60 votes, and Republicans are just not going to do that. I mean, Republicans would basically be allowed them to like lose political power, and I don't see them doing that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think you touched on a really good point. Is that the filibuster again is kind of the root of all these problems, right? And it is true that if the Biden administration or a future mainly Democrat wants to deal with this, the filibuster is in the way. Yeah. Because I don't even particularly know how Joe Manchin stands on this, or Kyrsten Sinema, or sure. Congressman King, the independent from I think it's Vermont or Massachusetts. These like it's a tough sell. But again, like this is something I think it's kind of been one of our themes over the last month has been, Republicans want less people to vote because they've realized that less voting is good for them, and Democrats want to expand voting to everyone who legally can. And that, again, seems the crux of this discussion, right? And I think you're right. Like, I think the two things are political problems, and that just goes right back to the filibuster. Biden's kind of been somewhat milquetoast on this whole issue. I think he's, for his defense, he has a lot on his plate. Yeah. So maybe I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. But I would almost argue that the compromise that would work, and this kind of somewhat segues, but we can stay on D.C., but I think we need to bring Puerto Rico and D.C. in together.
Right.
Because I didn't know this until recently. Like, I think yesterday when I was reading a little bit on it, is Puerto Rico's actually elected some quite conservative people.
Sure.
Like, Puerto Rico is not just some Democratic haven where everyone's just going to come vote for Biden, and a lot of Republicans, like the Republican platform prior to Trump was actually statehood for Puerto Rico. So I would argue that a Tonic Accord type of compromise would be, let's bring them both in together. So Republicans are kind of appeased. But now again, like Trump's Hurricane Maria stuff probably didn't really help Republicans, but who knows?
Yeah, look, especially with the last election, if you look at the demographics of Hispanic voters, or Latino voters, I guess, they're increasingly becoming a coin flip of Democratic Republican, especially older Latino folks, more culturally conservative, perhaps even, religiously Catholic. It's not, like you said, it's not like a de facto they're going to be a Democrat. So I do see Puerto Rico as being like more plausible of the two, between DC and them, of being, admitted into the union as a state. For that exact same thing. It's like, I think that there's some Republicans, and I think we even had here in the past, there have been Republicans from Florida that have promoted moving Puerto Rico to statehood. Obviously, Florida has a lot of, a huge Hispanic population. A lot of Puerto Ricans are in Florida. So, I can see how that has more support there. And yeah, the political realities of Puerto Rico are more balanced than they would be in D.C. I still think overall Puerto Rico would probably go blue, but that could change. Who knows? And the people of Puerto Rico themselves, who are U.S. citizens, contrary to what Marjorie Taylor Greene might believe, these people, the people in territories, are U.S. citizens. I think they deserve a say. I think if you're a U.S. citizen, if that's what it says in your passport, you should have the same amount of political, enfranchisement as anyone else. And that's not the case for some people. So I do think Puerto Rico should be admitted as a state. I think it's more politically plausible. And I like your idea. I like your idea of bringing them in as a package. But I actually don't think that would even work. I think it's a good idea, but I still don't think that would work, because if Puerto Rico's a coin flip and D.C. is solidly blue, it still shifts to the left.
Right. No, absolutely. Like, I'm being very optimistic there. Yeah. There have been studies, though. A Fortune study said 50% of the people they surveyed, want D.C. to have statehood. And apparently after the Capitol riots, actually more people wanted D.C. to be a state, which was kind of interesting to me. A lot of Americans also support Puerto Rico, but again, there is the political feasibility of it. And I just wanted to say too, like I gave a background on D.C., so I thought I would just mention that Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines were, not anymore, but Puerto Rico, Guam, Cuba, and the Philippines were all kind of a package deal after the Spanish-American War, that we kind of got as territories. And honestly, man, from what I've gathered, the only criticism from people about bringing in a state like Puerto Rico into the Union would be economic reasons. They say, well, it's it's GDP, blah blah blah, is not great. It would hurt the Union. American taxpayers would have to pay for this, yada yada yada. And there's a really interesting example about Lisa Murkowski, one of my favorite Republicans in the Senate right now from Arizona. And there's a great article that I read where it was talking about how she was born at a time when Alaska, she's an Alaska Alaska senator, that she was born when Alaska was still a territory. And through her life, she saw Alaska become a state. And actually the big argument for Alaska becoming a state was that it was super poor at the time, and that statehood actually helped improve pretty much every industry. Let's see, it says here that the situation vastly improved full admission to the Union, 26% wage growth, 26% increased job creation. It basically helped everyone in Alaska do better, in a nutshell. And so I think the only honestly, I've looked into it. The only arguments for people to say that Puerto Rico shouldn't be a state is it's a poor territory that would hurt the economy of the United States. And at least in Alaska, I think in 1948, I think it was sometime around there, when it was brought into the Union, it actually brought Alaska up with it. Sorry, it was 59. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people think that Lisa Murkowski actually could be a crucial person if there was ever a vote, that she could actually be a crucial Republican to go along with this, right. And maybe even D.C. So I think it would be interesting, because to me it's actually really not a right or left issue. It's kind of more like economic and kind of where your values stand on maybe different issues.
Sure, I mean, it should be that. It absolutely should be that argument. I do think that the political aspect, especially of the D.C. one, is the main reason why we're not going to see that happen. But it should not be about the political implications. It should only be about, hey, are we providing the same amount of rights for every American citizen? And the answer currently is no. So we should change that. That's at least my position on a basic theoretical level. As far as the Lisa Murkowski thing, that is super interesting. It is fun to think about, because for you and me, who's millennials, we've only ever known the 50 states, that the and the nice neat flag. We got 50. It's a nice number. But my grandparents, when they were born, it was 48. Hawaii and Alaska weren't states yet. It wasn't 50. And there's nothing in the rule book that says we can't go over 50, right? I think it's just we get used to it because it's just kind of neat and nice and compact. It's like the 50 states. But no, man, let's bump those numbers up. Let's get those numbers up like it's Wolf of Wall Street. Let's go to 51, 52, 53 even if you want to add Guam. Guam's an interesting one because that is a very, very small territory and very, very far away from the mainland. I mean, I think it's farther than Hawaii. Significantly farther than Hawaii, away from mainland United States.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the kind of thing you make a state on its own or make it a part of Hawaii even. I'm not sure exactly, but still though, the people that are there that are citizens deserve the same political rights as anyone American citizen in that representation in government. And I think it's also important about the Alaska point is that, through our research, we learned that process did not happen overnight. They started trying to get the Alaska Territory to become a state in 1919, and only after trials and tribulations and losing by one vote a few times, it happened in 1959. So that's also important to remember that let's say we do start to see the ball getting rolling on something like Puerto Rico. Just because there's a bump in the road doesn't mean it's going to be over, right? It could be a 15, 20-year battle, but who knows? Maybe by 2040, we'll have 53 states. It's unfortunate that it seems like it takes that much time, but the winds of change continually blow, and I think that it is possible that we could see more states added to the Union. And like you said, the economics of what happened to Alaska, I could hope that would be the same for Puerto Rico, that it would not only lift the people in Puerto Rico up economically, but also create a feedback loop of commerce and goods and services to the mainland United States as well. I mean, I really don't see why not, frankly.
Yeah, and do you know what kind of always fascinates me here actually is that there's I just noticed that basically I think the Constitution, it was Article 5 or something like that. It talks about how territories of the U.S. can basically be defined as something that we have annexed or etc., but is not touching other states. So I'm like, how did Hawaii kind of get streamlined, or Alaska? But
Or
like you
Alaska,
said, it
yeah.
took a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it kind of fascinates me because Guam has its own tax system, which is based on the U.S. tax codes. Puerto Rico, which is a commonwealth, has their own tax system based on U.S. laws. So it's like these guys are already adhering to our system. And I do think there's a little bit of social justice in this that I understand, is that like the U.S. never really gave Puerto Rico, especially Puerto Rico. I don't know as much about Guam, but the U.S. barely gave Puerto Rico an option. They annexed Puerto Rico over 100 years ago,
Yep.
and kind of used it as our economic jumping off grounds. And over time,
Caribbean,
we've
yeah.
never really wanted to. Yeah, like it. I mean, oh yeah, a lot of the Caribbean, definitely a lot of the Caribbean. But you know, we basically, it was kind of a neoliberal, before neoliberalism even existed, some more imperialism, and we just kind of let that be. It's kind of half-assed, and these people, you know, they pay taxes, they are involved in our system, but they don't
Yeah.
get a voice. Like I do think, just on a humanitarian side of it, I don't even want to go total social justice, but it's something that they deserve to have, in my opinion. And but let's put on our Republican hats for a minute, or like I said in the last episode, our MAGA hats for a minute.
Yeah.
Would it terrify you if you were a Republican senator, or I don't know, a Trumpist type of person, to know that Puerto Rico and D.C. are becoming states? Let's say hypothetically they become states. What would be going through your mind?
I would be terrified. I'd be terrified before that was the case anyway, because of the way that I think public opinion is going and the way that the party is going. I would be terrified for the long term. But no, I mean, I would be, if, again, MAGA hat on, I would be terrified about D.C. because that's solidly blue as it gets. And again, they deserve to be that. They have every right to vote that way. But if I'm putting my Republican hat on, D.C. is where the concern is. But Puerto Rico could be seen as an opportunity. Again, look at how Trump did with Hispanics in the last election. He increased his popularity among the Latino community. Which is crazy. I mean, phenomenal, right? Yeah. And I do think that if Republicans were to shift away from, I mean, arguably, especially the alt-right and the margin tail, like, I mean, if you shift away from basically white nationalism, and focus more on just like, you could pick up Republicans in Puerto Rico with the, the whole culture war, go back to conservative Christianity, the religious thing, tie in family values, and I mean, obviously family is super big in Latino communities. They, on average, they have larger families than like white American families. So tie in these values, tie in all that. Like, if I was a Republican, I would hope to see Puerto Rico as an opportunity to gain political clout and political expansion. But so are the Democrats, right? The Democrats are also going to see Puerto Rico as a huge bonus to them, and then a possibility of picking up a ton of voters and support. So, I mean, like, that's the problem, is I understand why Republicans don't want to admit more states. It's just like the same thing as I understand why Republicans don't want more people voting. It's because they're going to lose. They're going to lose. Their policy planks are becoming increasingly less popular, and they're making decisions, like we talked about in the last episode, by for some reason not supporting some of these massively popular public policy positions. Sorry for all the P's, but I don't know. I mean, like, I think the Republican Party should be scared of what's happening regardless of adding states, but definitely they would be scared of adding states. But again, it's a shame that they're scared of adding states for political reasons when, like you said, we have to think about the humanitarian aspect of this. These people deserve the right to vote on their political on their political representation if they're American citizens. That's as simple as it gets. It's going to be a fight. It's going to be a fight. I think it'd be really cool to one day see that flag gain a star or two in my lifetime.
Absolutely. And I just can't help but imagine that Hurricane Maria, why do I keep saying Marina? But Maria, I couldn't help imagine that if Puerto Rico maybe did have elected officials inside of the U.S. House and the Senate, maybe there would have been a bigger push to actually get help there quicker.
Absolutely.
And also the fact that the CARES Act gave less money to D.C. than other states neighboring it. the fact that citizens had no say over the riots, after George Floyd died in D.C. Yeah, there is a bit of disenfranchisement, which unfortunately has been definitely a part of our history. Um, but I just can't help but imagine that it would be better for the country, historically speaking, going forward. And it's bad to me that Republicans are not even willing to give it a chance. Like, give them your case. Don't just say we don't want more voters because they're automatically going to go left. Like,
Right.
maybe switch your policies so you're less toxic to people that don't look like you.
Yeah.
Like, let's be honest.
Yeah,
like,
maybe start persuading people to vote for you. Instead of blocking people from voting for the other side, maybe start being better and getting people to vote for you.
Exactly. I mean, I watched a Tucker Carlson segment on this a few weeks ago, and his biggest fear is that the country is not going to look like it did when he was a kid. And it's like, dude, like, shut the F up. Like, that is not where the party needs to go. Like, give these people a chance. I personally grew up a Democrat, became a conservative more later high school into college, and have kind of stayed there. Like, there's other people that change their minds. People change their minds all the time. And I just think if you don't even want to give that option there, it doesn't make sense. But again, back to kind of the start of this, it is going to be hard because you would need a bill to go through both houses, and that to me seems like the most difficult part, especially when we have such an even split. And then you have the media apparatus where, I mean, I like Ben Shapiro. I've liked him less since January 6th, but you get people like him who have. They have disingenuous arguments about how it's not constitutional and how, like, these people are trying to violate the population in voting. It's like, I don't think Ben Shapiro is some white nationalist, but there are disingenuous arguments going on about how these people should not be voting. It's like they could serve alongside us in the military. Why can't they vote?
Yes, they volunteer to risk their lives for this country, yet don't have a congressman or woman in office. That's just a problem, man. I actually can't even believe that there's an argument about the constitutionality of admitting Puerto Rico. Like we've admitted states before all the time, and pretty recently, 1959 is not that long ago. And on top of that, like, change it if you think something's wrong. If the Constitution's blocking us from doing something that's completely humanitarianly right, then, like, change the Constitution. We amended it for reasons. We've amended it many times for very good reasons. So I kind of really hate how much everyone relies on abstract constitutional interpretations to then apply to, like, modern, very real, on the ground issues. It's kind of a problem Americans have. Like, I think if you look at other countries, I mean, every state has a constitution, but ours is actually one of the oldest. Most constitutions in the world are from 1900 and after. I mean, through obviously restructurings of lands and wars and everything, but our Constitution is old. Our Constitution is not young. And our Constitution should be changed and has been changed and will continue to change. So acting like it's this set in stone thing, I think Puerto Rico becoming a state's a good idea, but if only it was constitutional. Like, make it, dude. What the hell? Like, why are we blocking ourselves from progress from a document that is supposed to be changed over time? So that argument from Ben Shapiro is bunk, in my opinion. I also think that, like, I don't know, man. Like, I think that it is disingenuous. It's disingenuous to use all these abstract constitutional arguments when I think the reality is they know that they're not popular in these territories, and that would mean, political detriment to them. Let's also look at what do Puerto Ricans think about this. Puerto Rico just votes, and they vote on these measures multiple times, as an idea that they should seek statehood. So this is the recent election, November 3rd, 2020. 52.34% yes, 623,000 votes. 47.66% no, 567,000 votes. Now that's not like an overwhelming majority, like a 70-30 or something, but a 5-point difference is no joke in politics. A 5-point difference is significant. And it's been consistent. Consistently, Puerto Rico has voted that they want to seek statehood. Among the mainland Americans, it's even higher. Mainland Americans, sometimes it's 2 out of 3 in many surveys. 66% say that they want Puerto Rico to become a state, and they support Puerto Rico seeking statehood. So again, the people are behind it. The Puerto Rican people are behind it. The mainland American people are behind it. I think there's a strong case, if you're looking at past examples like Alaska and Hawaii, that there's a benefit economically to both mainland and new territory to this kind of, coming together. I don't see why not, except for the political realities. And unfortunately, that's where so many of our good policy proposals go to die, is the political realities say, oh, no, we're going to lose votes, so we're going to block it with a filibuster, and good luck.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And first, I would like to know why that 47.6 or whatever percent of Puerto Ricans don't want to be a state.
It is, yeah.
I'm really
a good point.
But I would imagine that, whatever, but yeah, the constitutional thing also, like, I'm not a constitutional expert, but Hawaii is much further from the U.S. than Puerto Rico, at least looking at a map. So if Hawaii could become a state, I'm pretty sure Puerto Rico could become a state. I'm just saying based on what my eyes are telling me. And second, like for a Guam, my practical solution would be let Guam become its own country or do its, that probably is complicated because they're already part of the U.S. system. Their tax codes, their yada, yada, yada is all part of us. But like, why do we even care about a small, tiny country like that is so far away and they can't even vote? Like, what's the practicality of forcing them to be under our umbrella? And why do we even want them under our umbrella at that point, right? Like, I just wonder, especially like a Guam or the Virgin Islands or American Samoa, like, why don't we just let them do their effing thing on their own, man?
Yeah, especially, look, if you put it to a vote and they want to be separated from the United States, I say let them go. The reality is these territories are remnants of an imperialist past. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case today. You go in Guam, but like, it kind of is. If you go in Guam, the biggest thing there is the U.S. military base. You know what I mean? Like, that kind of still has a lot of the remnants of imperialism, for better or worse. And a lot of people might think that's for worse. I just perused, so I wish I'd read this earlier, but there is a Harvard Political Review talks about the meaningless vote for Puerto Rican statehood. And they make and I'm not agreeing with everything they're saying here, I just only skimmed. But they did mention that like a reason you might have 47% of Puerto Ricans not wanting to become a state is because they don't want to be Americans. They don't want to be in the United States. And in fact, that the Puerto Rican Independence Party received 14% of the vote in a recent election. That's not huge, but that's not insignificant.
Okay, yeah. So that actually is great point there. Like that makes sense to me. So it's not like they want something better. There is also people that say, hey, like we've basically been on our own other than having to pay taxes and be drafted. Yeah. So like, why don't you just let us do our own thing? Yeah. And to be completely honest, like I as more of a isolationist in terms of my foreign policy views, not military related, but I would say let them do their own thing. Like but again, 52% want statehood. So again, that's a moot point, but that makes sense to me. That's actually interesting. It's not because they're just like, we want difference. It's like, there's some people who just want, there is pride. To be Puerto Rican is to be Puerto Rican. Yeah. Like, I'm sure there's people that just would like to actually be a country. Like, Look at Cuba. We annexed Cuba, too, after the Spanish-American War. And arguably, I wish they were a state. I could get some good cigars and some really good beans over there. So that would be amazing. But again, like Cuba's independent. Maybe Puerto Rico just wants to follow suit.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, maybe they don't want to be a territory or a state. And that's the argument that this Harvard Political Review makes right now. It says Puerto Rican statehood would irreversibly deny the wish of many Puerto Ricans to just be that, Boricuas. But again, obviously, it's still split, and the majority want to be a state. I think that's the thing, is I think we should respect these referendums in these territories, and give them the political representation that they deserve. Or if they don't want to be a part of the system, begin a process of letting that happen. But I don't see that happening, because the United States is going to be like, hell no, we're not giving up our military base in Guam. Or if it is, it's going to be like, well, if you want to be your own country, fine, but you're going to have to let us have a military base. A big like fat Guantanamo. One. Yeah, a big fat one on your island. So, it is a weird position for these people to be in. I don't envy them as far as, feeling like you're between a country and another. I can't imagine what that feels like. So I don't know, but I ultimately, I think I've said it before, I think we should respect the referendums that they set out. I think we should admit it to the state if they want and give them the exact same political representation that any other American has.
Yeah, definitely, and I agree with all of that, honestly. Again, because I think lately, since kind of the Trump era is over, you and I have maybe clashed a little more on more like black and white, Republican, Democrat, more economic stuff. But with this, like, again, I don't think it's a right or left issue. It's kind of more just like how you view the U.S. should kind of operate. And my thing is, though, is that D.C. I think needs to become a state. Like Puerto Rico, there's a debate there. Guam, there's a debate there, but D.C. is home to, I think it's about 700,000 Americans as of this year, and they don't have a representative.
It's more than some states.
Yes, and to me that's a tangible difference. It's like these people live in the continental United States, the seat of government, literally the Congress that you don't have a say in electing anyone to, is in your own city. Like that's kind of nuts to me.
You're walking them go in like, man, I wish I could vote for one of them.
Well, the weirdest thing is they have shadow congressmen and women that they can elect, but they don't do anything. Like it's wild to me, man. And and the sad part is that it is mainly like minority communities and less wealthy people that are the ones that are being impacted by this in DC.
Very interesting, huh? And it's a weird pattern we always find.
Yeah, weird.
Yeah, I think this issue is a good litmus test to where your actual like political ideology lies. Because get rid of the like, do these people deserve these rights is kind of the base, like the and of course we do want nuance and to get deeper, and we have. But I really think an issue like this is, like you said, it's not like a Democrat, Republican, who can outsmart the other. It does seem like it's like, man, like what is your political ideology? Do you believe in a democracy? Do you believe that a healthy democracy should exist with more people involved and participating in it? I do. So yeah, I mean, this is it's an interesting issue, and it is cool to see that the conversation starting again, because you have the potential for it to get farther in our government's processes than it has before.
Absolutely. And just the last thing that I will say is that I think it could be difficult still to happen, just to be Debbie Downer for a moment.
Yeah, no.
Is that because Biden, in my opinion, will probably be a one-term president, and I do see there being some shifts in 2022, and and the filibuster I don't think is going anywhere. So it does bring up a question. The Republicans obviously have a chip on their shoulder where they've kind of ingrained this thought that for some reason, a new voter means a Democrat.
Right.
Until they can shake off that view, which I don't think that is inherently true.
It's not inherently true.
If you get rid of the Trumps and the Tucker Carlsons, maybe you have a chance, but I think they first need to exercise their kind of racist, ethno-nationalist demons first, because they can win. They can get some of these people. I know minority people, like in my own personal life, that voted for Trump. Like it's possible, but they need to just stop saying more voters means less power for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost a self-manifesting prophecy. If that's the thing you're going to keep putting out, then people are going to be like, yeah, well, you don't want me to vote, then if I do vote, I'm going to vote for the other guy. So, yeah, strange self-fulfilling prophecy is an interesting thing. And about the filibuster, I don't know did you ever see that video of Joe Manchin when they're like, would you ever? And he's like, never! he yells, he's like, I'll never get rid of the filibuster. Hopefully that's not what they say about statehood for some of these territories. Hopefully it's not never, in my opinion.
I think Joe Manchin looks like he's in a hostage video all the time. Like he's such a pragmatic centrist that he's literally tried to find that line between both sides, and he can't say one damn thing wrong or he's fucked. Excuse my language, but yeah. I
mean, I don't know if I mean, he has a lot of power in the Senate right now, but he has also a lot of eyeballs. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing for him, but we'll see. I mean, he has to get reelected eventually. That's probably going to wrap up this episode. Do you guys at home think Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., Guam, or any one of those three or more I think this is what, U.S. Virgin Islands as well.
Yep.
Do you think these territories should be admitted as states? Why or why not? Do you agree with our claims about the possible benefits or detriments of doing so? And do you think that it's a political reality, or is this just dead in the water based on how divided we are today? We do want to hear your opinion. It's a super fascinating concept, especially if you are from one of these territories. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on this. So please let us know. Leave a comment. Always catch us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and a host of other third-party sites. Leave a like, leave a subscribe, and tune in same time next week for the live podcast as well. Thank you guys for